to begin in a downward facing dog. And you might precede that with hands and knees pose for just a moment. See if you can get that setting of the hands where you press down, shoulders off the neck. And then with toes turned under, we'll begin to move the hips back, raise the hips up, and we'll come into downward facing dog or Adho Mukha Svanasana. And as you come into this pose, you might find a couple of familiar movements. You might add something like moving the hips from side to side or pedaling the heels up and down. But if there's a way that you kind of carve a way into the pose through a few movements, you could find that here. And just see how you can greet and say good morning to your body. And we'll give this first downward dog just a few more breaths. And then let's bring the knees down to the floor. Now you can either sit on back to a child's pose. I'm going to opt to sit in a virasana. So nicknamed hips to heels, but in all actuality for me, it's a hips to blocks between the heels or block between the heels. I'll just go with one. And we'll just get into this for a moment of sort of assessing our body from a slightly different position. So this is a deep knee flexion, a moderate hip flexion, a pretty intense plantar flexion for the ankles that can cause a lot of consternation for some people. And just taking a couple of breaths right here, we're going to set the shoulders back and down. Take an inhale breath and upstretch the arms. You might even tip the face up so that you're facing between the fingers, between the hands. We'll take a light twist, not a deeply invested one, into both directions. So when you're ready with an exhale, you'll face over towards the right. I can just barely put my right fingers down to the floor, and that will suffice for just a couple of breaths. If you feel like your hand otherwise really can't catch anything, maybe there's a corner of a prop nearby. But again, we'll just be here briefly catching our breath. And then with an inhale, we'll take the arms all the way back up. And exhaling, we're going to come over and face towards the left. And again, maybe just a fingertip connection behind you. Maybe there's the corner of a prop. And then with an inhale breath, again, we'll come back to center, arms up, stretching overhead. And then let's encounter our second downward dog. So from here, I'm just going to keep that block in place because I'm going to go back to that virasana in just a moment. So lifting up into downward dog, sort of stepping around behind that prop. And again, I'm going to press with the hands, look for that up stretch. If there's that little movement or two that helps you assess and feel and find the pose, you could work through that here. How about lifting the heels, bending the knees, pushing the hips further back, stretching out through the spine. Maybe those legs can come straight if you paused with them in that deep knee flexion. And then from here, perhaps coming just a little bit ahead with the chest, arms, and shoulders, rolling out some width across the shoulder blades, pushing the hands down. And then traveling back to what might feel like a deeper stretch in the dog pose. And then one more time here, we're going to come down. It could be a child's pose. I'm going to return myself to that virasana, sitting on a block between the inner ankles, inner heels, rolling the shoulders back and down. And let's lace together the fingers, flip the palms to face forward, stretch the thumbs down towards the floor, straight arms, straight arms. Feeling here that while the arms did internally rotate and come in front of your chest, we don't have to cave the chest back away from that. We can still get that sense of broadness across the collarbones. Right, just get a sense here of which way your hands are crossed. We'll drop the arms, uninterlace, reinterlace. We'll flip the palms forward. And again, we'll press those hands out, thumbs pointing down, straightness through the elbows, lifted through the chest, bottom tips of the shoulder blades to the middle of the back. All right, from here, we'll unlace those fingers. So good with that virasana or child's pose for now. We're going to subtract that block out one last time by, as a means of transition, let's find that way into downward facing dog. And again, if there's something that helps you encounter the practice with a sense of having opened, acknowledged, found, touched the places in your body that just need a little bit of that acknowledgement, here's the pose in which we'll kind of take stock. All right, so we're gonna do a couple of knee down twists. And for myself, since I'm on the hardwood floor, I will most definitely need some padding. So I'm gonna put that in place before we even get much further along, just so I know it's there. And then from your downward dog, you're going to take your right foot forward between the hands, and we're going to bring that left knee down to the ground. So here's that knee down lunge. Since we come lower when that back knee is down, I feel that most of us can probably get out of the required need to have the hands on blocks. But if you feel when you're on fingertips here, if you're on palms here, that you have had to get there by elevating the shoulders up towards the neck or overly rounding the shoulders forward, that big extra protraction, then maybe that level of block height makes a good difference to you. We're going to stay low for another couple of breaths. And as you stay here low in the posture, I'd like you to go from, if you were on the top of that left foot, we'll tuck the left toes under. And you can push those toes back against the floor. I always find that it's like definitely big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth and fifth toe are maybe barely skimming the floor, but I'm endeavoring here to untuck the curl of my toes and try to get them against the ground. Right, we'll stay for a moment, and what I'd like us to work on here is essentially a hamstring curl. So you're going to bring the heel of that foot towards your backside by bending your knee. It's the only way to get there. And we're going to do a few just exploratory. And what you might find is that once that knee comes into a bend, that because that exposes some of the tension on the front of the hip, you kind of shift your hips back a little bit as though you could meet the heel halfway. But I'll encourage you here as we go through this, to keep the hips low as you would keep them for your lunge. And just a couple more, really thinking about kicking your own backside. All right, we'll bring those toes back down to the floor, and let's come into our other side. So when I pop onto fingers, straighten my elbows, lift that back knee, lift my hips, and then I'm going to switch right forward, left back, and then right knee on down. You know, I'm thinking, feeling, dreaming about my neck and shoulders a lot these days. So I'm gonna go for that pair of blocks. I can just about get away without them, but I'm really trying to give myself like the deluxe version of any pose so that I give my shoulders and upper back as much support as necessary these days. It's too much tech time, and then I'm heading into the garden these days, and all that stuff has me slouching over. All right, so with those right toes turned under behind you, can you for a moment kind of peel those toes back against the floor, not just the big toe, but what about second, third, fourth, and fifth? Can they get down to the ground? So you're trying to move your foot to stretch your foot. All right, and then inside of this, we're gonna go ahead and work that hamstring curl. So tighter on this side. Can you bring the heel bone towards your backside? And again, if you find that you kind of get mid-range and then you push your hips back, you're going to keep your pelvis low as you would situate it for your lunge. And then work a few more deep knee flexions. One or two more here. And just getting a sense of the range and the strength required to go through that range. Hopefully not too crampy for the hamstring. All right, we're gonna go back to that first side. So I'm gonna turn right toes under, lift right knee up, and then just kind of swapping out. There's like a sort of knotted downward dog in the middle of it. And then left knee will come on down to the ground. Same as where we were just a moment ago. And as you take this, just a couple, like say 2, 3 of those hamstring curls, you're gonna bend into that knee. This time go slower. And when you're at that deep knee flexion, hold there for a moment. Just pause and counter it. See if you can really squeeze in and then release. And one or two more. I'm gonna do 2 more for myself here. So taking that slow knee bend, roar, pausing once I get there. So if I wanna stretch my quad on my left leg here, going to have to recruit the strength of my left hamstring. Here's my last one, slow-mo and a little pause within it. And we'll go ahead and bring that down. And then from here, instead of being forward and down, and I've been using blocks, we're gonna come up so that we're a little bit more extended in the spine. So if this causes troublesome feelings in your low back and you're a little bit more contented with length in the lumbar, stay forward. Otherwise, I'll encourage any and all of us to get the strength to come into this extended position. I'm gonna keep my hands on my hips, low back. There is the option to hold on to that knee, but just always notice when you're leaning into the hand and shoulder when the core could be doing something. So I'm gonna keep my hands on my waist and my back, but that knee hold is an option if you need it. And then we're gonna do the same hamstring curl exercise here. So getting in a few, and for myself, these feel more limited. And why would that be? Well, I've lifted up my torso. So that means I'm putting more length on the front top of that thigh, that left leg that's behind me. Oh, and so I do feel more limited in my range of motion as far as bending that knee goes. Probably looks different, but I wasn't monitoring visually. We'll get a couple more. Last one. And then foot back down, hands to the ground or blocks. And again, we're going to switch sides. So left toes are under, left knee lifts, and a little switcheroo. And again, there's sort of like a pose. It's like a not downward dog in here, just where you're able to transition from side to side. Right knee down, right toes under, staying with this for a few breaths. And we'll get 2 or 3 super slow ones. So the knee is still on the ground. And you're gonna go through that full range, pausing at the top so you can really give it your super squeeze before releasing back down. All right, that was my last one. Okay, so coming up, and again, there is the option to hold that knee, but what I would suggest is cultivating the strength to hold your torso up without your hands or arms in front of you, if that's accessible to you, and know that it's the next step, even if you can't get to it today. And you're in a back bend, so that means you've taken your torso more above your pelvis, which is going to ask for more length, and then you're stabilizing, so it's doing double duty. And then from here, coming through a set of those knee bends, knee flexions. This is tricky business. I find that, well, I'm sliding for one, but then secondly, when I begin to bend that knee to its full range, I kind of like press into my front foot and leave the lunge a little bit. So I'm gonna ask myself to stay low and do a couple more. There's a back bend in here. There's a knee flexion. It can be a lot. Those things that cross over the pelvis. Last one. And then we'll come on down And then from here, just to kind of get out of lunging for the moment, let's turn the back toes under, lift that knee, and then take a long step to come forward. And we're going to be in a half forward bend. So I've got these blocks right here. I'm going to flip them to their tallest ends. It works for me to put my hands on them. Let's have the feet at a pelvic width distance. Whether you are on blocks or more, right? You could even use the front edge of a chair. You could also hold your shins. I'd like you to press your hands against whatever they are in contact with so that you kind of remind the shoulders of where they are and what they do. And then from this, if you've been holding on to something ahead of you, let's each one of us hold on to the hips or waist. And then with an inhale, we'll come all the way upright and vertical. Take a moment here. And what I'd like us to do, move my blanket for the moment, is stand onto a block with the right foot. And that puts us in an automatic balance pose, which I love. So as you're here in that standing balance, let's get a couple of those kind of observational things accomplished. Like when you stand here, the first order of business is don't fall off the block. But how we hold ourselves on the block is kind of where I'm interested. So if you're here and you are stable enough, but you have to stand very crooked, we're going to think about bringing that pelvis towards the left, right? It's when it sticks out towards the right that we know we're not really using this big pocket of strength. We're kind of just leaning out on the socket. So as you're here trying to move that pelvis towards the left, and in doing so, you might find that you actually tilt down on the right side of the hip. We know that is our pelvic list. I'm going to pivot to the side so you can see where I'm next guiding our attention. So that'll be to be on the right foot, pelvis centered, hips pointing forward. And we're going to work a hamstring curl on the left side, the free leg side. And so as you work with this, I want you to notice if when you bend your knee also comes forward, and give yourself the task to bend your knee with the knee just about pushing back. I'm going to look down from above, just as I suspected it slipped forward. This is a funny one for my proprioception because this is so much work to move my thigh back and to bend my knee. Something in my nervous system's like, oh, that can't be it. It's probably more right here, but tis not. And then we'll release the legs straight. I think I'll do the next few looking down because that will be educational for me. So we're going to bend that left knee like you could kick your own backside. And again, I'm going to keep my eyes on it, even though that puts me in that hunched over posture I'm trying to abandon. If you need to look down, there's only one way to do it. You got to look down. And I'm going to watch the next 2 or 3 here, really trying to determine that when I go through this knee bend action, that I'm not pushing my knee forward, it stays in line with the right leg. Last one, and we'll hold. I think I can look forward now. All right, and let's go ahead and come on down. And let's do side 2. So left foot here will stand on your block. Pelvis will face forward. If you have that sense that when you're one-legged, the hips go in one direction, the ribs go in the other, you're really thinking about holding yourself centered. So dream about that pelvis sliding towards the right to the extent that as you're on this leg, that left side of your pelvis tilts down. And then do a couple of knee bends. And just to kind of get an experience here that I can learn from, I'm going to do 2 or 3 without looking and just try to assess it through the feel. I already know that that knee's coming forward. I'm going to watch. Yeah, I knew it. The next couple. All right. Then I'm going to hold myself to account here and try to keep my knees in line with each other. Oh, and when I bend that right leg, I'm going to prevent the leg from sweeping forward. And I know it's knocking off other parts of my posture to go a little bit out of whack, but I'll take it. There's no day in which I feel like I'm going to get all of it right. So I abandon that. I'm going to watch a couple more. Again, I want an experience I can learn from. So I want to see what it looks like when the knees are in line with each other so I can begin to learn it without seeing it. Better, better. All right. And then hold one. Hold two if you want. And try to hold my knee back. And as I stay for a moment, actively bending that back leg, that right leg, trying to keep the knees in line. All right, let's set that free. Put that down, and you can move the block to the side. And let's take a moment, return back to a lunge, but not a deep one. We're going to come into sort of that lunge warrior one hybrid. So forward bend firstly. I'm going to start things off with blocks. Again, I'm trying to go in the super deluxe version of keeping my neck and shoulders where I want them. Right foot forward, left foot back, right knee to a bend. And we're going to stay on either the tallest blocks, maybe the edge of a chair ahead of you. You're going to make that back leg really straight, really strong, push the front heel bone down. And then from here, again, much like a warrior one lunge hybrid, can you bring your torso upright with that back leg straight? I'm going to go for a little stance adjustment. I'm going to wiggle my back leg out a little bit so I can deepen the bend in my front knee. And you can look for a similar edit if it makes sense to you. And then once you have a sense of the legs being where you want them to be, this again is something of a back bend. When you're ready, add the arms into an upstretch and maybe even tilt those arms back. And then being really slow about it, you're going to press into that back leg, make sure it is so very straight, and lean yourself forward. Come down to those tall blocks or a chair's edge. We're going to stay for a moment here. Now on this one, we couldn't, bend that back leg to a deep knee bend and then just straighten it with the leg in the air, obviously. But while you're here for the moment, can you commit to a vertical shin in the front leg, a really deep lunge in the back leg, edit the stance as need be, and push down very distinctly through that right heel bone. Right. And then it's through that right heel bone pressing that you're going to walk, maybe clump your blocks forward, and you're going to transition slowly to a variation on warrior three. So once I fully open both legs, I do walk the hands forward so that I can lengthen out my chest. With my arms really close to my leg, I end up curling forward. How about you? Good. And when you're in here with your Vira 3 variation, move the weight back like someone's grabbed you by that back ankle and is pulling you back a few inches. And then in here, without dropping your knee, you see where this is going, you're gonna keep your leg straight behind the hip and then bend your knee as though, again, you could kick your butt. And again, visually, so I can learn here, I'm gonna drop my head underneath. It's that terrible posture I'm trying to eradicate, but here it is again, being useful. I wanna make sure that when this right knee goes into a bend, I'm not dropping the knee towards the floor. All right, next time it's out straight, nice and lightly walk your blocks in as you let that foot come on down. And we're going to swap sides. So left foot forward. Right leg back. And again, we'll get that assessment here of strength through the legs. And we're gonna come on up. And then as you're here, notice, are you beginning to leave the left knee bend? And we'll try to stay down low. Back leg nice and long. And again, edit the stance as you see fit. Make sure that you can get this front left heel bone to really do your pushing, your pressing. And then we'll take the arms up. Back leg nice and straight, long and strong. Front heel presses, back leg lengthens, all the time curled up in a chair or at the computer here. We want to expose what those hips have been doing. Give those front of the hips and thighs the light of day. All right, so nice and easy, mindful, hands swing apart. You're gonna lean on over back to a forward fold in your lunge. And for the moment, just find those two legs. Like I know the back knee, it wants to do this little bend because it makes things easier on the hip, but you're gonna be really straight through that back leg. And you're gonna press down through that left heel, like really smash the floor with that. And I always end up walking my blocks several times. So I'm gonna go for the first edge, which is just to take them a little forward and then pull myself up into that warrior 3 variant. En route, the blocks will walk even further forward. Back leg is nice and straight. And then again, I'll look to learn. I'm gonna do a few knee bends, knee extension exercise here, hamstring curl, just to look to make sure that when that knee comes into a bend, that I'm not additionally flexing the hip, meaning I don't want that knee to drop. And I think I've got it. So then I'll tip my gaze forward so I'm not always looking down. Going through an active range of motion for knee bending. You know, for a lot of people with pretty easy knees, not too tricky, not too painful, this knee flexion extension, it's not such a hard thing, but we're putting it in a bunch of different orientations, trying to make it different. Legs out straight, and then softly back to your lunge with that foot on the floor. All right, let's make our way back to a downward dog. Go somewhere symmetrical for a moment. That was a lot of asymmetry. All right, and then forward to that half forward bend, nice long back, lifting hamstrings. Hands to hips, and we'll come all the way up to stand. All right, so for this next one, so helpful to have a sliding space if you're on carpeting and not a slippery floor like tile or wood. You might stand on like a sheet of paper, a magazine, a paper plate, those gym sliders. And if you can't fuss with creating a sliding surface, just hold this isometrically and you'll get some good stuff. But I'm going to come to myself a little space to do so. A position in which I'm going to have the blanket under the left foot. And I might fold that up in half so it's a little bit easier to manage. And as I have it underneath my left foot, that leg is going to slide back. So I come to lunge over my right knee. And again, if you're just going to work isometrically, you take a long lunge, be upright, and pull in like you're going to scissor your legs closed. For those of us in the lunge, come up to standing by dragging that back leg in. And we'll do a couple here. I always feel like the first few with something like this, it's just like, how do I make it reasonably efficient? So as I start, I lift my back heel, I'm on the ball of my foot, and the further this leg goes behind me, that's when I begin to drop into a lunge. And I think that part's fun, but it's the return journey I think is really interesting. So instead of leaning forward, can you be more vertical and press that front heel bone down and swing that leg ahead? Let's do 3 more with the left leg back. And again, isometric, You can just come into a low lunge, squeeze to lift in, give yourself a break, and then do a couple more. So main event here is that you are not tipping your pelvis forward in order to come up. All right, so 2 more. And you can see the whole thing's pretty slow. I'm not trying to go whipping through this. And then last one on this side. Front heel presses down, and you use that to come on up. But we'll do our 5 on side 2. So blanket here underneath the right foot. Right leg goes back, and at a certain point, it's far enough back to pull you down into the lunge. And then really plunge down into that left heel bone. Whoa, sticky spot in there, so that when you come forward, you don't have to tip your torso ahead. So this way, we're really making these hip flexors contend with a real hip flexion. If you're seated through most of the day, then your hips and your knees are flexed. They're not actively flexing unless you were sitting somewhere really, really uncomfortable, but you probably have a chair, cushions, pillows, blankets, taking that leg back in. And so throughout most of your life, we'll go ahead and say that, the hips and the knees are mildly flexed. They get accustomed to that. Muscles build around those loads. We'll go with 2 more here. That was number 3 for me. So when we come into this, we're trying to say to the legs, oh, you can flex, but can you flex and actually move the body? Let's go with the last one. Oh, and then we'll come all the way on up. That's such a good one for me. So I want to try that from kneeling. I find my mat is helpful on this one for the front foot. So you might try the same. And it's going to be the left knee that gets the blanket. And actually, I'm going to move it down so my whole shin is on that. Maybe I'll even refold it. I've got these long shin bones. So from my knee to the top of my foot, I've got that padding, just because that will actually make it just a little bit more efficient. And then I'm going to push this front foot down, and that'll help me slide the back leg out. And I'm not going to go like to my deepest possible lunge. I find this one much harder than the other one. I can feel it already. I haven't even started yet. But this front hamstring is going to have to work. That back leg's iliacus, rectus femoris, those are going to have to work. So I don't go to like a totally low lunge, even though my mobility, my flexibility could put me there. My mobility can't, meaning I can't move out of it. I mean, not gracefully. And then we'll pull that knee in. Let's do 4 more. So again, not your lowest. 3 more. Going back, pulling in. 2 more, going back, pulling in. 1 more, going back. And 1 more coming in. Oh, not easy. And then let's do the other side. And same premise persists here, right? Like I don't want to lean my body forward to do this. I want my hips to know this, to kind of know like, what is it like to be upright and to move this leg around? Okay, so I thought this mat would be helpful, but it's beginning to slide. All right, so leg can start back, and again, just be moderate in your range. This might be my harder side, let's see. Pulling in, and then pushing back again. I'm gonna go a little bit smaller than on that first one because I didn't feel a lot of control there. Pulling in, 3 more. And maybe like me, this wasn't so apparent on my first side, is that I don't get a straight trajectory. Like even though I'm trying to pull straight forward, it ends up going towards my left foot a little bit because that part of my leg is stronger. All right, let's see if I can go straight forward on the last 3. Kind of. Last 2. Going back, last 1. And then we'll be done with that one. So we'll be done with sliding. I'm gonna set this out of my way, open up my mat again. And let's come into downward dog. So I love a downward dog, or a lot of yogis do. I love it for, it's like baseline reading, like what's going on? How do things feel? And then how about a child's pose? Or again, I'm going to opt for virasana. And I've used a block, so I might make that my first touchstone. Like, oh yes, I was already here. But then I'm going to sit on something a little lower, which will just be the end of a folded blanket. I can come all the way to the floor, so I'm not curious about that. And I know a lot of my yoga students can as well. Those of us with healthy knees don't really struggle with this one too poorly. But when you get there, the idea is that you're not hunching. Like, do you have that strength around the pelvis and low back to actually sit yourself up? And if child's pose is your better choice, in your child's pose, without elevating and dropping the butt, could you do something of a cat and cow? Like, could you lift the tailbone, drop the tailbone without necessarily elevating and then dropping the hips up and down? All right, and then let's come off of this. I've got one more thing for us. A little head support will be useful here. I'm just going to tip the camera angle down so I'm more on screen. And one of my favorite hip flexor stretches. So I'm going to come to my back, have my knees bent. Then I'm going to take my right foot and hook it behind my left foot. And I'm going to grab my right foot with my left hand as I then drop my right knee towards the floor. And rather than having the right knee point sideways, I'm trying to have it point straight ahead of me. I'll give it a few breaths. And this is a very asymmetrical pose, so I wouldn't personally spend a lot of energy on trying to level the hips. I do kind of categorize some of the things we do just as like straight up stretching. Like there doesn't have to be a lot of technique other than like, can you array your body in such a fashion that it elicits that stretch sensation? And, you know, for me, that's not where I put a ton of emphasis, but there's something to it. And sometimes around the hips where it's just so dense and stuck, it's nice just to kind of see like, oh, is there a way that I can get any darn sensation around the front of the thighs? All right, let's unhook that side. If you're just getting into it and just finding your sweet spot, I don't mean to rush you along. You can certainly stay. But I'm going to take my left foot behind my right one. I'm catching my left foot in my right hand, and then I'm dropping that down. And again, I'm thinking more of my knee pointing straight ahead of me rather than sweeping out to the side. And then just letting that left knee drop at all. Not so concerned about symmetry or like regularity, neutrality around the pelvis and spine. And instead, let's just call this stretching. Just find some sensation, create sensation around the pelvis and thigh. All right. So that brings us up to the end of our class. If you feel like there are more moments of stretch to be had, of course you linger. And then, as always, if you need something else to conclude the practice, using your own internal guidance as the best wisdom for the end of the sequencing.